Right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we've structured our business and how we develop software in a little different manner than a lot of people do. I caught the last few minutes of the last talk in here, and we have a very kind of different approach to that they do. It all kind of starts with trying to find an original way to solve problems. And I first encountered some of these methods when I met my first business partner, Marcus, who is a shining example of how to do things different. That's Marcus. Let's take a second and soak him in. He's a very interesting character. He has a lot of interesting thoughts about software, how to build software. And when I met him, he wanted to start a company with me. My first thought was, can we really have a business if this is how you're going to arrive at a client? And he had a lot of interesting ideas. He didn't use contracts. He didn't use fixed prices. He didn't write specs. He didn't believe in having employees. He didn't believe in owning code. He liked engaging real people in creating software. And he didn't like conforming or having to change who he was in order to have a successful business. So when I took those two things together and thought, is this really something I want to do with my life? Can we actually have a business looking like that and doing these things that are so contrary to how people are working? And then he told me who he worked with. And he worked with some pretty serious clients. Banks, insurance companies, record labels, funding agencies. And he did all of this on his own terms, in his own way. And part of the reason why he's been successful and we've built a successful business around some of these ideas is because by being different by default, it allows you to approach things a different way and allows people to accept your ideas without having the baggage of all the failures of past software to contend with. So our philosophy is all about closing the gap. I think in a lot of large companies, there's a big divide between the people that create software and the people that use software. And there's a lot of things in place, whether it's process or whether it's people, that sit between those two because they feel that developers can't talk to real people, and real people shouldn't be exposed to developers. And we really feel that this method actually creates shitty software, not good software. And people will talk a lot about the 50% of software failing stat. And I don't really know how true or not that is. What's more important to me is, forget the software that fails. What about the software that just sucks? That's been in an organization for 5 or 10 years, that people have learned to live with, learned to adjust to, but it sucks. And it sucks because they weren't involved. Because there's people that sit between the creator and the user. People like sales teams, marketing forces, QA people, information architects. People that don't necessarily provide a lot of value in between. Now, there's lots of people that do that in large teams, but I really feel that when you get the smallest gap between the person making the software and the person using it, that's when you're going to get these interesting ideas. And that's when you're going to create software that's better. I think one of the bigger challenges, and a lot of the projects we've come in to fix, have been projects that have too big a team. And that big team really separates the things out. So you have to have all this process in place to manage this 15-person development team talking to these 150 users. When you can break these projects into smaller pieces, you actually have opportunity to communicate between those two things. So we really set out to find out what was separating us from users and get rid of those things. So the first thing that we found didn't work for us at all is the whole idea of writing specs. Really, specs to me aren't specifications, they're just speculation. They're a way to manage risk. They're a way for a user to be able to say, I'm going to write down everything I need so that I can pass it off to the developer and I know he's going to do those things. He's going to come back with them and then I'll have them. Because you know what? We can't talk. Because he doesn't understand me, I don't understand him, we're not even going to bother to try. What I found with specs is that if you go to an end of a project and you look at the original spec versus what was created, no matter what kind of project you're looking at, it's night and day. It's a kind of document that's irrelevant from the minute the ink dries on it. It doesn't provide or account for the fact that software is organic, software grows, it becomes. And the best ideas when you're creating something don't happen at the beginning of the project. They happen in the middle of the project. They happen once people actually use it. Until someone can see software, touch it, move it around, do stuff with it, they don't really understand what it does. And the problem with specs is they base all these assumptions at the time of the project when you have the least amount of information. You don't really know what it's going to do, how it's going to interact, how it's going to work when you're just planning it out. So to make those decisions, it's not the best place to do them. Plus, it also avoids the chance to reflect. So it basically sets up a situation where you write down what you want, you give it to somebody, they go away, they interpret it however they want, they bring it back, and you don't like it. And that's where the conflict in software development starts, between the people who want something and the people who are forced to make it. So the other thing that I think contributes to shitty software is contracts and fixed prices. Contracts are like the bridge between specifications and fixed prices. They're basically a way for business users to manage the risk throughout a project and say, you know what, I've written out what I want, I've contracted him to do it, even though I know that what I want isn't really what the software is going to be. But I'm going to contract it out anyways, and then I'm going to set my price. So now you've got to guarantee that somebody's expectations aren't going to be met. Either your developer is going to take a bath and work way too hard and get screwed because he didn't estimate it enough, or you're going to get a client who paid too much for something that didn't take as long as he expected. But you're never going to get that little pocket where both people are happy. And those are the kind of confrontations that happen at the end of the project. The end of a project should be a celebration. You should be happy. You should be grateful to get out of the door and provide some value. But generally, when you're at that point, you're not. You're fighting. Because you've got a list of things that you said you were going to do that you didn't do. You're not getting paid by the end of it. And there's this huge confrontation around the fact that you've signed an agreement saying you're going to do A, B, and C. What it also promotes is it promotes software that works but sucks. Because features will make it into the final build that maybe aren't needed, that maybe aren't going to provide them the most value. But they're in there because they were written in the spec, you've said you were going to do it, you've gone down the line, and when you get to the end of the project, you're like, forget it. I just have to finish this list, because if I don't finish this list, I violated my contract, I'm not going to get paid. I know that's not a good addition. And it also prevents the people who are using it from having an input beyond the beginning. Because until they can use it and change it and mess around with it, they don't really get those great ideas on what that system could do for them. And we've found over and over again in the past 7 years developing software that those great ideas happen at those phases. Someone will start using the beta version of the software and say, you know what, it would be great if it could do that. And if that's not in the spec and that's not in the contract, it rarely ever gets into the final build. What ends up happening is people say, okay, we'll take that idea, we'll shelf it, maybe we'll look at it later. And you never really get to look at it later because by the end of the project, you don't want to work with the client anymore because you didn't get paid what you thought you were going to get paid. The client doesn't want to work with you because, hey, you're not trying that hard at the end because you just want to get it done. And a lot of the projects we take over are exactly this situation. They're clients who have got something built from them, it's finished, it's up there, they don't like it, it doesn't work the way they thought it was, and they can't get the developer to come back and fix it. The developers just fuck off. They don't want to come back anymore because they can't stand these people. They've gone through this horrible emotional thing. And so part of that process is how do you build something without doing those things? And that's really, you have to build it in an agile format. And that comes down to tools. And that's one of the reasons why I really like Rails. Because Rails gives us the ability to quickly prototype things. We can arrive on a Monday morning, and at the end of the day, we can have something that the client can actually use. We don't have to go away for 3 weeks or 4 weeks and do a lot of configuration and set a lot of things up and generate a lot of things to give that value. It also means we can continue to give value and continue to get their involvement at the very beginning. Because it's very important in order to build software that's going to last. And we have systems that have been in place for over 10 years that have been successfully used and are still well-rounded systems that are constantly being added to because we're always involving the user. And it starts at the very beginning. If you can get your users involved in what you're doing on the second or third day and keep them involved, it adds a huge benefit to your software. The other thing that having a rapid application kind of environment does is it allows you to inject some breathing room into the process. When you work on a project for 5 days a week for 3 months straight, there is no chance for anyone to give you qualified feedback because you're moving too fast. At 5 o'clock at night until 9 o'clock in the morning is not time for someone to look at your software. There's just no opportunity. By having a faster process, it means you can leave space. So at Unspace, we usually work on a project 1 to 2 days, at the maximum 3 days a week. And that gives the project 2 or 3 days in between for someone to actually try it. So we come in on a Monday and we finish what we need to do. They have all of Tuesday and all of Wednesday to kick it around. Because people are busy. They can't look at it on your schedule. They've got to look at it on their schedule. And if they don't look at it, they don't become invested. And if they're not invested in what you're doing, they're not going to believe in it and they're not going to support it when it gets down to the end. What we've found is we're rarely ever on budget. In fact, I can't remember any projects we've done where we've been on budget. And we're rarely ever on time. Frankly, our projects never end. They have a date when people start using them, which is generally very early into the process. But we have a long-term relationship with people, and we go over budget, but it's not a problem. In fact, our clients willingly go over budget. They're happy with the fact that they get to control the pace of the project, they get to control the features they want. We're not building things they don't need, and we're not building things they don't use. And their ideas become part of what they're doing. So the choice blends back over to their side. In the last few minutes of the speech before, he mentioned that you don't want the plan to be a management plan. I really don't think there's management and not management. You have to work directly with the people that you're designing for. You have to work with the people who are going to use it. You have to be on the same team. The minute you segment it off into, here's our plan, go and do it, and we're not involved anymore until it's delivered, you're instantly not getting their investment. And if you can get them invested in what you're doing, if the software being successful is just as important to them as it is for you, and they win because of the stuff you've done, that's when you really get interesting software and long-term clients. We recently had a client at the Monk Center of International Studies at the University of Toronto that we worked with to build a bunch of infrastructure and some of their website stuff. And for the project that we built that helps them manage all their events and contacts and a bunch of other things, he was a large part in him winning the IT Person of the Year this year. So for us, that was a huge accomplishment, because for us, a victory is when our clients win for something that we help them create. When the perception around the university isn't that Unspace came in and created a project for them, they created the project. We just enabled them to do it. We just became part of their team. But we weren't outsourced. We weren't handled separately. We worked with them on site, crafting something that every single person in that building knows there's a part of that system they can point to and say, I did that. I decided that that should be the way it is. That feature is because I asked for it, because we involved everybody. And that's one of the things that I think people don't do. They use a focus group style to build applications, where they take the people who have the money, so the vice president, the head of marketing, they all sit in a room and they write a bunch of crap on the board and say, okay, this is what my people need. And developers don't force themselves onto the people that are going to use the software. They just take that list and go, great, that's what the client wants, let's build it. Instead of saying, you know what, who's going to use this? Is the receptionist going to use this? Why are we not asking her? That's the person who's going to decide what those features are that are interesting, because they're the ones that are using the system on a day-to-day basis. And if you cut them out of the loop, you don't win. So another thing that really attracted us to Rails, and to open source in a way too, is the difference between craftsmen and laborers. And I think it's a really interesting distinction when you're thinking about developers, especially in the last 5 to 6 years, when developing has really become a career option. I think when we think of developers, we look for essentially musicians, because I think musicians make the best developers. When you go into music, you don't go into music because it's a steady paycheck, or because there's great benefits, or because your parents are going to be proud of you. You go into music because you have to, because that's all you can do. It's a calling for you. And the guys that work with us at Unspace, it's the same thing for them. They wake up in the morning thinking about Rails. They go to sleep thinking about Rails. They're passionate about it. It's more than just software to them. It's kind of integrated into who they are as a person. And that's really important when you're creating software and how you relate to your tool, because it's not just about a day job. It's about finding people that really believe in what they're doing. And I think Rails, and especially open source, cultivate that, because it allows you to have a deeper connection to your tool. When you have a problem with Rails, as we recently did with one of our developers, Hampton, he fixed it. He can go in and change the code. He submitted it, it got patched, and suddenly everyone in the Rails community now has access to that fix. That intimate relationship that he has with his tool cascades all the way through to how he develops, because it's at a different level. When he's making an application, it's not punching a clock. It's not just doing features. He's questioning the features and thinking about them and working with them, because everything that he makes is a reflection of him, much like when a musician writes a song. So I think that's a definite thing that you want to look for when you're developing, and what you want to look for in your tool. What tool can you really be a part of? It's not what can be an expression of you. So that was my little spiel about open source and Rails. We have a Rails pub night running on the third Monday of every month. You're welcome to go to unspace.ca and find out more about that. If you're interested in Rails or want to talk about Rails, or you want to talk about anything, come by and hang out. It's a lot of fun.